welcome to this lesson. In the previous lesson, we talked about JavaScript long date, where we examine how long dates are formatted and displayed in JavaScript, and we also noted some things about factors affecting dates in JavaScript, such as the fact that commas are ignored and then names are case insensitive, regardless of whether they are in small caps or uh, you know or in all caps, or in lowercase or in uppercase, it does not matter. JavaScript understand both and smart enough to interpret it to give us the correct date and the correct output for such a new date object. So that's going forward from that, we are moving to another aspect of date objects in JavaScript, and we are going to be looking at how to pass dates in JavaScript. So when you have date input, how do you pass them? If you have a valid date string, you can use the date pass method to convert it to milliseconds. So basically, date pass method allows us to convert a valid date string to milliseconds. Then the date pass method returns the number of milliseconds between the date and January 1st, 1970. So when you use the date pass method, it returns the number of milliseconds between the date that you are passing and January 1st, 1970, which is a reference from where computer counts time. So let's quickly take a look at an example in our code editor. So let me just pull this up like what I already have here, and I'm going to make a variable, then the date pass method. Then which date do I want to pass? Let me do February 24, 2024. Documents. Okay, let me output this out. And now you can see the number of milliseconds from January 1st, 1970 to February 24, 2024. So, and like I said in the last lesson, you can see that this part, comma, or anything that I have here is ignored. I can as well just put my date this way and it will still work without any error. So this is the the equivalent milliseconds counted from January 1st, 1970. So when you have your milliseconds, then you can now use this number of milliseconds to convert it to a date object. So if you want to convert this to a date object, how do you do it? So let me just use this example that I have here, and I'm just going to do something different, and which is going to be the fact that I want to add another part. So let me say date, and then I want to use new date to convert these milliseconds into a date object. Then I will just pass in what I already have for the date, and that is the milliseconds, just as you can see right there. And you can see that if I come here and just change the output, you can see that I'm getting something different. So here, the date pass method allows me to get the milliseconds from January 1st, 1970 to the current date, which is February 24, 2024. And then I am now using the new date method in order to convert this millisecond into a date object. So what I'm basically doing is that since I already have my date pass method assigned to this milliseconds variable, I just pass that variable into the new date method in order to pass it and convert it into a date object. And you can see that milliseconds that was gotten earlier, which was this, is now converted into a date object. So which was this has now been converted into a date object after I passed it with after I applied this new date method or the pass result in order to generate or to convert it into a date object. So this is how you used the date passing method in order to convert your date into a new date object. Now I've been talking about the fact that the milliseconds is counted from January 1, 1970 to the current date. So the reason is because January 1st, 1970 is the starting point that computer used to measure time. Just like when you want to race on a track, on a field, there's always a starting point. Just think of it like a marker zero. So on a highway, which is like a starting point. So every date is now measured as how far it is from that point. So from that January 1st, 1917, every date, subsequent date is now measured from it. It being the starting point that computer used to measure time. The reason is because early Unix system needed a fixed reference date. So they chose January 1st, 1970 as this reference, and it is the reason why it is the starting point that computer used to measure time. So let's quickly take a look at another example. And in this example, I will clear this off. So I want to pass an ISO date format. So let me make this variable again, millisecond equals date dot pass. Then I am going to put this. Now right here you can see. Now you can see that here the output I'm getting is another milliseconds by passing an ISO date format. So you can see that this format that I have here is the ISO format that we've talked about in the previous video. And then also do not forget about the short date style and the long date style. But this is an ISO date format, which is the most reliable and universally supported by JavaScript. So I just pass it in this format in order to get an equivalent milliseconds of it, just like the way I did in the first example. So another example, let me just quickly do one more example before we go. So this time I want to pass a date with time. I've been passing date before. Now I want to add time to the date that I'll be passing here. So let me do July 21, 2023. Then date, time. And then you can see this. I'm passing both dates and time. So this example that I just shown now include both the date and time. And then the date pass convert it into milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. So what you have here is the conversion into milliseconds from January 1st, 1970, which is a reference date through which computer used to measure time, to this present date that I have here, which is July 21, 2023. You will see that if I change the year, the milliseconds should change as well. And if I increase it, it should change as well, like you can see right here in my browser tab. So this is how you use the date pass method in order to convert date in order to convert valid date string into milliseconds. And don't forget that you can now use the new date method to pass the milliseconds to convert it into a date object. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next